Thanks, Sako. And, it is truly an honor and a privilege to be a part of this and to honor Dr. DeLong, talking about generations of influence, being an orthopedic trauma surgeon at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. DeLong, his imprint, footprint, and impact continues to be a big part of what we do today, there and everywhere. So it is truly an honor. It is also an honor for me to introduce our guest lecturer, Dr. Preston Klein. It would take probably the majority of the time to go through his resume. However, just to give a very high level overview, I was first introduced to Dr. Klein about a year ago when I heard him talk about residue and taking the hard path. And I immediately thought, wow, this person gets it. And so he has dedicated his life to figuring out, and this is on their website of the Mission Critical Team Institute, of the question of why some people make it and why others do not, which I think is a very interesting thought process and awesome thing to think about, especially in the world that he lives in. He got his bachelor's degree at Rutgers. He got a master's in education at Harvard, and then a doctorate of education at the University of Pennsylvania. His experience goes on and on and on, and has been involved in the idea of many mission critical teams throughout very many different venues, including military special operations, emergency medicine, as well as trauma surgery, tactical law enforcement, as well as aerospace, urban, and wilderness firefighting teams throughout the globe. So with that, because it's much more interesting to hear what Dr. Klein has to say than me, I would like to turn the lecture over to Dr. Klein. And again, thank you for being part of a very special event for us today.
Dr. Klein, do you want to share your screen or do you want me to advance slides for you? I have your slide deck. Either way works.
I can go ahead. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
I can go ahead and do it. If you allow me to share my screen, I can go ahead and share it.
Oh, right. I'm sorry. I'm the only one who can. I got to give you a co-host.
While that's happening, I just want to say what an honor it is to be here and to give this particular lecture, and to thank the DeLong family for participating and being a part of this. I will try not to be boring, but I will say that as a person who spends much of his life behind the scenes and teaching, that particular introduction was relevant for what we're doing, for sure. All right, I'm going to see if I can do this from the beginning. And can you see that all right?
Yep.
Perfect. And so again, my name is Preston Klein, and the first thing I actually want to bring to your attention is this quote. So we're doing this in Philadelphia, and 245 years ago, a group of people got together and wrote this quote: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." The reason I'm showing that to you in the first slide is because as I travel the world, and just to move to this next slide so you can see it, and I do my work with military special operations or trauma or fire, all the mission critical teams that I work with, the suicide rates are probably double everybody else. And one of the things that we forget, as you are of service to the world, of service to your city and the country and everything else, is that you have the right and actually the duty to pursue your happiness, to have some joy, have some contentment in your work. You do not have to trade your soul, your life, your marriage, your liver, your body in order to be of service to the country. You can do both. But there are some habits, there are some traditions that need to be re-examined and need to be reconsidered if, given that you've chosen this hard path, how to make meaning of these experiences and how to process them in real time. So what we're going to talk about for the next few minutes is this idea of what have we learned over the last, what at the Mission Critical Team Institute have we learned over the last 12 years or so doing this work. And just some background so you know how I enter your world a little bit. I worked at the Wharton School for 10 years, helping to run the leadership program there. And as part of my dissertation at the Ed School there, I did my trauma observations under Dr. Bell Schwab and Babak Sarani, who is now at GW. I'm also currently working with Vinay Nadkarni in a program at CHOP, re-looking at some of the way that we train and develop surgeons. And then in October, we're doing a project with the Mayo Clinic in Stanford on high-performance resuscitation teams that bring together military trauma with civilian trauma to sort of look at what are the lessons learned, what are the newer ways to do things. And so one of the things I want to remind you is that the way I enter these worlds is that my expertise is in developing teams. And so as a reminder, everybody has a first day. Not only do we have a first day, but you are a mentor for those people who have a first day. And one of the bigger challenges that you're going to face in your career is this problem, the tacit knowledge transfer problem. And it's this: having the expertise and having the ability to communicate that expertise is not the same thing. Just because you can do a thing doesn't mean you can teach a thing. And one of the challenges that you all have is that after years and years of experience, you actually know what right looks like. And more importantly, or not more importantly, but as importantly, you know what right feels like. And much like riding a bike, just because you can get on a bike and ride it, when it comes to teaching somebody, you know, there's a billion bikes on the planet, and they've been around for 200 years. And even today, no matter in what language, if we're going to teach someone how to ride a bike, at some point you're going to say, get on and pedal, because it's very complicated to actually transfer tacit knowledge, that knowledge that's embedded within you, that lived experience. And so one of the jobs that we have now, because teams are moving faster and coming together faster, you're working with more people you've never met, is the ability to transfer that knowledge and information in a way that they can hear it, understand it, and apply. And that in of itself is a skill set that we're still trying to understand. And it comes to us after long periods of time. So what I'm going to do over this sort of session that I have with you is give you a couple of scenarios. And so I encourage you to take out a pen and a piece of paper, regardless of where you are in this ecosystem, in this environment. I'm going to ask you some questions. And so the first one is this: will you commit an error or mistake today? Right? And one of the lessons that we have in mission critical teams is that we cannot fix what we cannot talk about. And in order to talk about it, we have to recognize the realities of how human beings learn. So the first thing we need to understand from a neuroscience point of view is that in order for you to learn, a mistake must be made. What do I mean by that? If you're moving along, doing everything well, there is no requirement for your brain to adapt. It can just relax. Your brain's a pretty selfish thing, and it wants to just maintain homeostasis. It doesn't actually want to expend calories to change. It is forced to change when you make an error, but that error only matters if it's reflected upon. So one of the ways to think about this, here we go, is to reconsider what we mean by error. One of the problems with mission critical teams, especially the ones I deal with in military special operations, is that they often are in no-fail environments. And so if you think about the countries that we work with in the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the US, and we think about what are called special mission units, these are the teams that work directly for the president or the prime minister, the ones that made the movies about. They tend to think of themselves as no-fail missions, no-fail environments. But the problem with that, as I mentioned earlier, the brain actually needs to fail in order to learn. So the question is how do you operate? How do you work like you do in a no-fail environment, while at the same time leveraging those small errors for learning evolutions? How do you have conversations? How do you engage with your team so that you can benefit from errors rather than hide from them? And one way to think about this is that error technically is the action of roaming or wandering. It's a devious or winding course. It's a roving. It's a condition of erring in opinion, the holding of mistaken notions or beliefs. The problem that we see when you look at sentinel events and catastrophic incidents is that it's often not an act of God. It's often a collection of small errors that were undiagnosed that collect and grow. And so the question is that how can you have a conversation with your team where they can hear what you're saying and you can hear what they're saying so that you can identify small things without the role of shame, embarrassment, or reputational risk? These things matter, but they also matter because, as we'll see, being able to fix something, you need to be able to talk about it. But in order to talk about it, you need to be able to see it. So the question I will ask you is this: do you think that you will make some sort of mistake today? Any kind of mistake or error? Then I will ask this question. If you think like most humans that you will you be annoyed, bothered, vexed, or irritated when you make said mistake? Most of you will say yes. And I want you to think about that for a second. If you just told me you know it's coming, and then you told me you're still bothered by it, why? If I told you it's going to rain tomorrow and you went outside and it was raining, you wouldn't freak out. That would be crazy. So why is it that every day, me after 54 years, I get up and spill my coffee, I make an error, and suddenly I'm upset about it? I've been doing it for 54 years, every single day. Why is this a novel event? It has to do with a concept called irrational optimism. It allows us to get out of bed in the morning. Each day, we have to believe this is going to be our day. But that irrational optimism actually starts to work against you because it allows a bias towards a sort of irrational way of looking at teams. And here's what I mean by that. If you have a team of 6 people, let's say, and you know that you're going to make a mistake today, that also means they will, which means your team is experiencing at least 6 mistakes a day. So your choice now is either you can discuss those mistakes or get lied to 6 times a day, either through omission or directly. The point is that this is a currency. It is a treasure to be able to investigate these errors because they allow you to move forward. But one of the problems with this is that you're not able always to see what the barriers are. And so I'm going to give you this example, and I'm going to tell you the story first about how I entered your world. So a few years ago, I was asked to go to one of the major hospitals that do open heart surgery. And here was the problem. The problem is that their circulating nurses, there was a high attrition of their circulating nurses. And they typically were the ones that needed to do that rotation before they became scrub nurses. And scrub nurses are a very highly trained role, as you know. And so the problem was they needed to fix this attrition of circulating nurses, or they were going to down the road have a real problem. And so they put together a blue ribbon panel to figure out what the problem was. And after months of the most intelligent people on the planet thinking about this problem, they came up with the following conclusion: doctors are jerks. And that's what they came up with. So they called me up and they said, Preston, can you come in, take a look at our teams, and just think, what are the ways that we may be able to engage in empathy or the construction of empathy in these critical environments? So I said, sure. So I went into this hospital and I spent 9 hours looking at 3 open heart surgeries, one after the other. And what's interesting about this story is you have to remember that I'm in the room as a researcher observing the team. What I care about is the interactions between the team, and what I'm expecting based on what I've been briefed is that it's going to be a pretty toxic work environment, but that's not what I encountered. What I encountered was people saying, I love you, and saying how great it was to see each other in the room. So I was very confused and I was thinking, oh, they're being performative, right? They're just performing for me, the observer, and it's really kind of this dark pit of hell that when I'm gone, it'll be terrible. But instead, it was very nice. And then the following thing happened. As they wheeled out the first patient and brought in the next patient, some surgeons came to ask me about my research. And as that lead sort of surgeon was asking me, and I was answering the question, and I was speaking too loudly, the anesthesiologist who was putting asleep the second patient steps away from the patient and looks over at me, and in the nicest way possible, reaches out their hand, like as if they're turning down a dial, and says, hey, Preston, we're still putting the patient to sleep. Could you dial down your volume a little bit? Now, that was the nicest shut the heck up I've ever gotten. And I would have actually thought he or she should have been allowed to just throw me out of the hospital. But what's important for this story to understand is what was happening to me, not to them. Remember, I was brought into this hospital because the belief was that information was being transmitted by the doctors in a very toxic way. But what I just demonstrated, because what was happening in me was I was having this spiral of shame and embarrassment and regret and feeling like a terrible person. I should leave the hospital and apologize to everybody. But then I realized, oh, Preston, you have a thick skin. They've already probably forgotten about it. But the question is, how did I develop a thick skin? How do we develop people to have a thick skin? The way we do it is through long, extended time around one another so we can observe and get used to one another, but we don't have that time anymore. The so-called apprenticeship model is getting shortened and shortened and shortened, so we don't have that exposure, so we don't actually know the difference. So what we started to do was that we looked at how are people understanding the difference between what we call routine and critical feedback. So here's the experiment that we started to do with nurses. We brought them into a room with doctors and we asked the following question. We gave them a piece of paper, and you can do this now to yourself with a piece of paper. You've requested a meeting with your boss to talk about your career. Your goals are to get some advice and improve your relationship. Your boss has asked that you send them 5 principles of routine communication to guide the conversation. And when we do this with teams, what they come up with is things like, well, courtesy, active listening, respect, purpose, these kinds of things. Like, you want the relationship to get better. It's emotive. You have, highs and lows. You're engaging in conversation. You're joyful. You use big words, right, to explain your point, and you're okay going down a rabbit hole. And then we ask, next week, you're going to come across a bad car accident, and the children are trapped in a burning car. You have 300 seconds or less to get them out, but you will need to coordinate 5 strangers. But I have a magical device. I can, in advance, send all these strangers your 5 principles of critical communication. So what are they? You've just met with a bunch of people. You've never met them before. And suddenly you need them to engage in an incredibly critical, rapid way and have communication clear and concise. So what are those principles? You can tell them ahead of time. And what the teams will say to us is clear, concise, directive. They will use a projective, loud voice. They'll have brevity. They'll use small words. And they'll be calm or almost flat, almost robotic. All right? So we put these 2 lists up on a board, and then we give the third scenario, and this is what's important. You are walking in the supermarket, a no-threat environment. There is no threats going on. You're having the best day of your life. You're listening to music, you have a smile on your face, you turn a corner, and a man starts talking to you using your critical communication principles. How would you label that person? And what we find is the words that we hear from the staff are jerk, rude, aggressive, not very positive words. So then we ask the team, how do you know in your team that you've never met before, because you have more experience and you have better threat detection in that environment? How do you know when we move from critical to routine? And it turns out that there's a lot of assumptions around that, and that doctors and nurses are moving back and forth, but are labeling it differently. So some of those nurses, like myself in that story I told you, was hearing a critical communication in a routine way. I thought he was talking to Preston. When he was talking to was a researcher. He was talking to a role. In a normal environment, when I say, hand me that tool, and you hand me something and I say, no, not that one, the other one. In a routine environment, my tone, volume, body language, all is reflective of my feelings towards you. However, in a critical environment, it's not. In a critical environment, you are your role. When I say, no, not that one, the other one, all I mean is the other one. And so what we've started to realize is that some of these hidden sort of biases and misunderstandings about your role in a given environment and how you move back and forth between those roles and how we're able to train and develop people to do that has a lot to do with people's willingness and joy to come to work or to not, because they're misunderstanding the role they're in. And once we did this with nurses and staff, the comments we got is, oh, they weren't yelling at me. They weren't mad at me. They literally just meant the other tool. And we're like, yes. In that environment, you're your role, not a person. Now, here's the thing. We had to go back to doctors and say, this doesn't give you permission to be a jerk. And the way we did that is we videotaped some gray hairs and some blue hairs, what we are nicknamed for elders in the community. And we said, watch how these folks are still in these critical environments able to say please and thank you when they're doing their work. And that's a mark of expertise. A mark of expertise is that you can be in the worst possible scenario and still maintain courtesy. And if you understand that's what right looks like, a bunch of other things become possible. And so that's one example of the kind of work that we do and the kind of teams that we're looking at. And this matters because one of the things that we're trying to understand is what are the cultural hidden barriers to high performance, especially when we're looking at what we call tactical swarms, teams, non-intact teams that haven't worked together for long periods of time, that lack trust and cohesion. How can we rapidly increase the likelihood of that? Because we know statistically from research that the cultural cohesion and trust will actually impact outcomes. So one of the things that we'll often talk to people is You know, we can't fix what we can't talk about. And in order to talk about it, we first have to see it. But once we see it, where you look is where you go. In all of these sports, skiing, motorcycles, parachuting, paddling, where you look is where you go. If you look at the rocks and the trees, you'll hit the rocks and the trees. If you look at the openings, you'll hit the openings. What's the point of this? The point of this is that when we're giving and receiving feedback, here's what you need to know with adult learning. After a certain age, roughly about 25 at the end of adolescence, due to the density of your neural networks in terms of your learning, one of the things that we know is that we can actually continue to increase your strengths, but we can't actually increase your weaknesses a whole lot. We can increase them some, but it's actually your strengths we need to increase. If you've ever met me, you might be disappointed to know that my ballet career has plateaued. This is as good as I'll ever get in ballet. And there's a variety of reasons for that. But me spending all of my time trying to get better at ballet will not, in fact, move me anywhere. But there's a bunch of areas that I have natural strengths. I was being facetious there, by the way. I have some natural strengths that I can actually grow. But here's the problem. If I put some monitors on all of you, if you're like the rest of mission critical teams, and I ask you to turn to your teammate and say, I want you to spend 1 minute giving them hard feedback, difficult to hear feedback, go ahead. Your heart rate wouldn't actually move very much, nor would the person who's receiving it. They would actually just write that down and be like, good data, let me take a look at it. If I then turned and asked you to say, I now need you to spend 1 minute telling that person why they're awesome, why they're amazing, why they're a pleasure to have in your life, your heart rates will spike. And the reason is because you've been trained to give critical feedback and receive it, but you don't actually have a lot of experience praising people or showing them what their strengths are. But the problem is that we can't actually get better if we don't know what right looks like. If we're constantly reacting to negative feedback, we don't know what true north is. So one of the things we have to all start practicing is when are we doing it correctly? And when do we say that? When do we say that right there? That's what right looks and feels like. Keep doing that. And one of the problems here is the way that we've been raised. So you all share a certain profile in terms of your ambition, in terms of your high standards, in terms of your work ethic, etc. I want to tell you a quick story. So I'm working at the Wharton School. I'm working in the leadership department. And we're the first generation back in the early 2000s to see a rise of females coming from historical patriarchal societies, the Middle East, Asia, Africa, Central America, who are coming to Wharton for the first time to get their MBA and go back to run their family's company. What's happening, though, is that they are coming because they're first generation with two underlying cultural norms. One, you must always get an A in your classes, and B, you must never interrupt a man. 50% of class grades at Wharton is about class participation, so you can understand the paradox. The paradox is they can't actually talk, and yet they're getting bad grades because they don't want to interrupt men. They're failing out of school, and they don't know why because they can't see it. Can't fix what you can't talk about what you can't see. So they come to my office eventually after they've tried everything else, not just me, the Wharton School is looking at this. And they sit down. In this particular case, it was a young Asian female from Japan, actually. And she comes in and she goes, I cannot raise my hand in class. And there was a bunch of rationale she came up with. And what I said was, the example I gave to her was, well, imagine for a moment that it wasn't you here. Imagine that you've graduated. It's your younger sister that you love. Imagine she's in this class. And one day she has to go to a job interview and she asks, would you come in and sit in my class? Would you do it? Yes, of course I would. Would you raise your hand? Yes, of course I would. Why? Because she needs the grade. Right. Here's the truth. We will do in service to those that we love, which we will not do in service to ourselves. Not only that, we will do in service to our shame and our embarrassment and our jealousy and our hatred, often more times than we will do to our potential. One of the things you have to start asking yourself in these difficult conversations, and the changes that are coming to medicine because they are coming, is to ask yourself, what are you in service to right now? Are you in service to fear, anxiety, worry? What are you in service to? And what I would say is the same thing I said to her. After the age of 16, everybody you love is looking up to you. They're watching you. And every time you don't raise your hand, they're choosing not to raise their hand as well. You have to decide what you're going to be in service to, your love of your little sister or your fear of making a mistake. And often that's enough, and they'll get up and they'll walk out. It's all about reframing. And part of the problem here, and this is, we're going to bring it to our sort of closure now, is this. What COVID has done in the last year is that we forced many of you in a place called liminality, betwixt and between. There isn't a normal like there used to be. Too many people are saying, I just need to get through this next thing and everything will be fine. That's a lie we tell ourselves. It will not get fine. The pace of change, the rate of information and dialogue, all of these things are placing us more and more in a steady state of liminality. If you're on the shore, you're on land. If you're in the deep ocean, you're in the ocean. But if you're in the surf zone, you're neither on the land or in the ocean. You are in between. And you either learn the rhythm of those waves or you get sucked under. We are no longer what we once were, but we're not yet who we hope to become. And we're going to need help to get there. So this is what I'll start to close with here in the last few minutes that I have you. And it's this idea of residue. And the story, the backstory here is this. I work a lot, as I mentioned, with military special operations. And one of the things that, as a lot of people don't understand, is that on the teams that are secret, on the teams that we're not allowed to talk about worldwide, when those folks get injured, like they did in those previous slides, there is a physical scar, maybe an amputation. They're not allowed to talk about it because they're not allowed to talk about how they got it or where they were. So what ends up happening is that they live in a kind of quiet despair. So about 4 or 5 years ago, no, sorry, 2 or 3 years ago, I was invited to a Wounded Warriors event for one of these teams. And I went down there, and what I didn't know was that the actor Tom Hardy was going to be there. Tom Hardy, strangely enough, had been reading my research to help him prepare to work on military sort of movies about the military. And he asked me the question, Preston, why don't you talk about residue in your research? And I had never heard of this term before. This is how he described it. He says, this is the actor, Tom Hardy was the actor that played Bane in Batman, if you remember that. He also was in Peaky Blinders and some other movies. And he said, Preston, imagine for a second that I play Bane in Batman. And then suddenly 6 months later, I have to play Abraham Lincoln. Well, if I play Abraham Lincoln with any residue of Bane, it looks like no one will believe it. It will look very stupid. It will look cartoonish. So I actually have to get rid, as a method actor who becomes that character, I have to get rid of all of the residue of that character, the emotions, the lessons, and everything else. And I have two choices. I can stuff it in the closet, or I can find a way to make meaning of it so it serves the next character. It builds the wisdom within me. And as he's telling me this story, I'm surrounded by a bunch of wounded warriors who I know are drowning under residue. I know they're dying of it, actually. I know the suicide rate for them is terrible, and I know this is the thing that's killing them. And so we start a research project, and we invite neuroscientists, psychologists, and operators and actors from around the world. And here's what we found. One of the things that's working against you is your training in pathology. You tend to look at deviance and you tend to think, oh, something must be broken. But here's what I want to tell you. You're not broken. You're not injured. You're not a survivor. You chose a hard path. You chose one of the hardest paths. If you're going to choose that path and live a long life where you get to keep your family, you get to keep your liver, and you get to keep your soul, and you get to keep your life, you've got to find the mechanisms to make meaning of those extreme experiences. But as I mentioned before, not just the bad ones, not just when the child dies on your table, but also the good ones. When you get that job, when you fall in love, that first kiss, when you get your first award, finding a way to make meaning of all of those life experiences so that they serve as the fuel that builds your wisdom and your character, so those that look up to you can learn and not suffer in the way that those that came before you have suffered. We have to do this in real time. We have to make meaning of these experiences because they're not going to go away and they're not going to get any easier. And the bad news is the world's not going to come rescue you because we think you're the rescuers. We have to find a way for all of you to stop looking at the things that go on as a pathologically, but instead to not put any prejudice to it and just say, this is the life I chose. This is the hard path I chose. And so how am I going to go about making meaning of this? And a couple of things to think about. Some of the things, and you can read, this is all open source research. So you can read it on our website, or we can send it to you through the links, whatever you need. But basically some simple advice. Go outside every once in a while. Drink water. If you're over the age of 30, get a sleep test. Sleep is a superpower. And what's interesting about medicine is that you folks know the most about sleep deprivation in the world, and you're the worst about it. You're the least compliant about sleep, even though you actually know the research behind it. Know this, you're going to need a third thing. Your world can't just be about your family and work. There has to be another thing. There has to be a thing where you can do what the Japanese Buddhists call shoshin, or the beginner's mind. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. You need to have a learning practice, and it doesn't matter if it's ballroom dancing or a rugby club or being part of a rock band. The point is there's a third thing you can go to, that you can just be a person without all the other things, where that community only cares that you are good at third base, and that's it. You can have small conversations and blow off some steam. We need all of you. We need all of you now, and we need you in 5 years and 10 years and 15 years. And the only way that's going to happen is if you start looking after yourself the same way you look after your patients. And so with that, I'm going to, just stop here, which is to remind you that our country and the city that you're in was started with this idea. It wasn't just about freedom and independence. That was just a mechanism to get you somewhere. And the somewhere was to be able to pursue your happiness, your joy, your contentment. You have a right and obligation as a citizen of this extraordinary country to at least try. And so if nothing else, I want you to leave this talk and ask yourself, am I happy? And if you're not, then start fixing it, not for yourself, but those who watch you, those who look up to you, and those who take their habits and make them their own. Don't pass on pain, pass on joy. So with that, I want to thank you very much. And I think that's my time, and appreciate just this opportunity. It was extraordinary.
Thank you very much, Derek.
Thank you, Dr. Klein. I mean, there's really not much to say other than that was phenomenal. And I think every single one of us can gather something from the words you said and understand exactly where you're coming from. And they all have meaning to us. So I appreciate the work you do, and I appreciate the work, the people you do the work for. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to the Long family.